The verse I want to just visit with you today is, let me see where we left off. I think we left off in 29. He makes the storm a calm, so the waves thereof are still. And Psalm 107 verse 30 says, then they are glad because they be quiet. Now, I really want to talk about the back half of the verse, but here's what I want to draw out today. And if you didn't hear Friday's devotion, it's probably important that you hear it so you can attach this as a little postscript to it. This psalm, we've seen distress enter the lives of individuals, and then they're desperately crying out to God, and then God delivers them supernaturally, even from their own mistakes and sin, and then they declare His praise and glory. And we see that pattern: distress, desperation, deliverance, and declaring, celebrating, worshiping God, over and over in the psalm. And at this point, the person that's in reference has chosen to go out into deep waters to see God's wonders, and God's allowed a storm to come up, and their soul has melted in distress, and they've cried out in fear, and God has calmed the storm. And we talked a lot about that last week, and there's so much to learn there. But then verse 30, then they are glad because they be quiet. Now, I want you to contrast that with earlier in the passage where it says their soul is melted, verse 26. Their soul is melted. And here's what I want to challenge you and encourage you with today, okay? Sometimes we do experience the melting of our souls, whether it's grief, distress, fear, anxiety, just life on planet Earth that's fraught with risk and potential problems and danger. But it's temporary danger. That's what I want to give you today. It's temporary risk, it's temporary grief, it's temporary melting of soul. I've prayed for a lot of folks the last 2 weeks that I know and are struggling and grieving and having difficulty. And I ask God to remind them in their difficulty. Now, I want God to deliver them from their difficulty, but I ask God to remind them in their difficulty that it's a season in which God is doing something very deep and very hidden but wonderful, okay? So I don't want to make a mockery of our hardship and say it's wonderful. Hardship is not wonderful. What God is doing beyond the veil of our hardship is what is wonderful. And by faith we believe it, and we wait for it, and we endure to it. But one day, temporarily, as we go through this life, but then one day eternally. This happens in two senses, okay? In this life, it's a temporary thing, but one day it'll be forever, it'll be permanent. Then they are glad because they be quiet. So God brings us out of tumult into quietness. He brings us out of melted souls and fear and anxiety into gladness. That's what He does. I've seen it in my life many, many times. You'll see it in your life many, many times. So trust Him today. If you're in the soul melting period, cry out to Him and wait for Him and endure, and He will bring you back to gladness and quiet. And if that's today, praise the Lord. If it's tomorrow, wait for it. If it's a week or a month or a year from now, it'll be worth the wait.